wagon! The Wells Fargo wagon?
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming down the street.
Oh, please let it be for me.
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming down the street.
I wish I knew what it could be.
I got a box of maple sugar on my birthday. In March, I got a great Mackinac.
And once I got some grapefruit from Tampa.
Montgomery Ward sent me a bathtub and a cross-cut saw.
Is that the first thing I said or not?
Yes, George.
Yes, the very first thing I said, or I'll eat hay with a horse. Get that spellbinder's credentials, I said. Morning of July 4th, 1912. And now look, my wife is off dancing at any and all hours instead of in the home. And the schoolboy is singing up street and down alley instead of tending to city matters. My oldest girl is bootling around with some wild kid, and my business has fell off so far I can't find the balance sheet.
Mayor Shin, I found something very interesting in this book about Professor Hill's alma mater.
I know all about that. In fact, that's all I can ever get out of him. Gary Conservatory, class of '05.
But if you just take time to read a little about the conservatory, you wouldn't have to look any further. It's on page...
Papa, the Wells Fargo wagon is coming this way.
Wells Fargo wagon?
It could be the band instruments.
The band instruments?
But Mayor Shin...
Later.
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming now. Is it a prepaid surprise or COD?
It could be curtains or dishes.
Or a double boiler.
Or it could be
Yes, it could be. Yes, you're right. It surely could be.
something special
Something very, very special now.
just for me.
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming down the street. Oh, don't let him pass my door. Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon is a-coming down the street. I wish I knew what he was coming for.
I got some salmon from Seattle last September.
And I expect a new rocking chair.
I hope I get my raisins from Fresno.
The DAR have sent a cannon for the courthouse square.
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon, it's a-coming now. I don't know how I can ever wait to see. It could be something for someone who is no relation, but it could be something special just for me.
Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon keep it coming. Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon keep it coming. Oh, the Wells Fargo wagon, don't you dare to make a stop until you stop for me.
Here you are, Winthrop.
My cornet. Gee, thanks, Professor. Sister, isn't this the most scrumptious solid gold thing we ever saw? I never thought I'd ever see anything so scrumptious as a solid gold thing. Oh, sister.
I'm very excited about Tom Hischak's new book, Broadway Decoded, and particularly honored that he dedicated it to me. I think it's a really interesting book to read. I love paging through it and learning all of these neat things about Broadway musicals, all of these references that maybe we had a question about or can learn a little bit more about. This is the perfect book for Tom to have written. He loves this kind of thing, so I wish him well with it. And so good luck, Tom.
Hello, Tom. How are you? Fine, thank you.
You were having a little glitch there. I was trying to get that clip up there. That, of course, was Mark Robinson, who gave you the inspiration for this book. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Today is National Read a Book Day, and I couldn't think of a better book to start with than Broadway Decoded. I'd like to share a little story before we jump into the interview. When I was a kid, I had a great mentor named Florence Epps. Here she is, and I've spoken about her in a few shows. She had a play house in her backyard, and I used to go every Wednesday and Thursday, and we would read from the classics, and we would read biographies, and this was in the 70s, so there were a lot of autobiographies that were coming out at the time. And if a name came up, or a phrase, or a place, or an event, and she would go, stop, 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 stop. Do you know who that is? Do you know what that's about? And if I didn't know what that word or that phrase or that event was about, she would close the book and she would say, I'll see you next Wednesday. When you come back, know what that is about. And so as I'm reading your book, all I kept thinking about was Florence Epps looking over my shoulder. Saying, where was this book when I needed this book? And it reminded me when the last revival of Annie was on Broadway, and actually there was a letter from the director in the playbill, and they considered taking the song "We'd Like to Thank You, Herbert Hoover" out of the show because they felt that modern audiences would not know who Herbert Hoover is. And as I'm reading this book again, I'm thinking again, what took us so long to get this incredible book? You have dissected every favorite musical of mine that I love, and you were very careful to stay focused on the classics. But you really dissect these musicals, and you give us a sense of what these references are that are made in the show. So congratulations on a
Thank you.
research book.
I hope dissect doesn't turn people off. I'm not that tough.
No, you can't put the book down. Now I want to go back and I want to, whether it's watching the movie or finding clips on YouTube, I want to go back and I want to really step into this. But I want to go back with you because, I mean, you are a historian. You've written so many books. Where did your love for musical theater begin?
Rather late. By modern standards, I was never taken to see children's theater and things like that. I didn't see my first play, which was a musical, My Fair Lady, until I was in 8th grade. So, and I fell in love immediately. But I'm behind, these kids who are dragged to Sound of Music and would go see Annie and Lion King and whatnot. There was nothing like that back then, anyway. And so it started there in high school. I watching that clip from the Wells Fargo wagon, I blush because my first part was Winthrop, and I could hear those, oh thither, oh thither, oh thither, isn't it the
I know. Well, I was going to ask. I mean, did you have a background as an actor yourself?
just high school, college. By the time I went to graduate school, I knew acting was not for me, and the world didn't need another actor, mediocre actor. So that's when I got interested in writing plays and nonfiction about theater. So, and I have directed, several dozen musicals and plays over the years. So I've been involved directly, but the acting one fell apart quickly.
But you're a great writer. When did you? I mean, this idea. I mean, you give credit to Mark
Mhm.
Robertson for giving you the idea for this book.
Right.
How did that idea? What was the conversation? I want to go
Yeah,
back.
it was a conversation, and it was Music Man, and came up, what do you think a pinchback suit is? I've always heard it. And we said, I'm sure it's, we could find out what it is. And that same show, what about this and this and this? And Mark said, who writes a blog? He said, oh, I think there could be a good blog in this. I said, Music Man alone is almost a book. No, this is not a blog. This is a book. And I says, you should write it. And then he got involved with other projects. And at one point I said, if you're not going to write that book, I'm going to, because I'm just so curious about all these things. And I started listening to soundtracks, when I'm in about 8th grade, high school, and I'm memorizing things. I don't even know what I'm saying, and I'm thinking audiences could not have known all these things, in particular in case of The Music Man. It was 1957. This play takes place in 1904. You had to be 70 years old at least and lived in the Midwest to catch half of them, because they were all gone by now. So that's where the book comes from. I said, Mark, I'm going to run with this. And it was one of the most fun books I've read, because I got to go back. I looked at 50, narrowing down to 50 musicals. It was not easy. And surprisingly, very few of them were contemporary, because we don't need those shows to be decoded. I mean, I might need to be explained what's going on in Mean Girls, but most people know what's going on.
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is that lingo, expressions, everything are constantly changing.
Right.
Things that we're listening to today. When I watch movies, all the time there are references that are made in movies.
Oh, yeah.
Last night I was watching The World of Henry Orient, and there are references. I mean, there's some also racial references that are no longer PC, but there are a lot of phrases and words and expressions in this movie that people don't even know what they mean anymore.
And it's only going back to the 60s, right?
64.
Yeah, we're not even talking about the 1935 movie, where, so many things are not known. But the thing about an old movie is you watch it and, and it's the same movie. But Music Man is done all the time. And people are always singing about the Nagas and the Friggins and the so-and-so, and they have no idea what they're singing about, and the audience doesn't. And it really doesn't matter. Meredith Willson was so good, and he made no apologies. Yeah, he would say about the Hoover thing, he would say, if they don't know who Hoover is, then don't worry about it. They'll catch on. They're making fun of the president, And I think that's what's so amazing about The Music Man, and why it got me started, is because I know the original audience didn't know these things. So you don't have to feel it's a dated musical because, we don't know what Captain Billy Whizbang is. It's like, well, nobody knew that in 1957. The fun thing is to find out what it is. Then when you hear that, Professor Hill sing that, and next time he's like, oh yeah, he's really making a joke here. He really is.
But of course, it makes a huge difference now with the way that you watch and listen to these
Oh
musicals.
yeah. And I would say that in all the musicals I picked, I tried to find musicals that had a lot of references that were known to most people at one time, but not anymore. And I didn't want to insult anybody. So, for Annie, you better explain who, Franklin Roosevelt is. I mean, hopefully everybody knows, but you can't be sure.
Well, you can't be sure these days.
No. And then if you mention Fireside Chat, then you've narrowed it down even more, And let's face it, that generation is going and gone to, listen to those Fireside Chats. I tried to balance things. For example, Rent is in there. That is not an old musical, but a lot of the things in Rent, street lingo, names for drugs, people in the arts, it's already foreign. And I consider a new musical still, because I'm old. The furthest I go is In the Heights is probably the most recent. I think that's the most recent musical, because there are so many New York references and Spanish language references that I think to enjoy that even more, it'd be nice to know what all those terms are. So that's one of the more recent shows, but most of them go up to the 50s. I would say.
Well, I remember a few years ago going to see a cabaret show, and the singer on stage was singing "I'm the Greatest Star," and when she got to the reference about Camille, "I'm an actual Camille," she actually said, "Whoever that is." And of course, people in the audience had a reaction to that, and I spoke to her privately afterwards, and I says, I don't mean to chastise you.
Mm-hmm.
It really behooves you to know what they're thinking about,
Yeah.
because she is describing a specific acting style when she's
Mm-hmm.
talking about Camille. Um, is that, I mean, when did you start writing this book, first of all?
Oh, this one, this did not take as long as most books. Most books take an entire year. This one took less, and it just came out officially in September, but it's been sitting there for at least 3 or 4 months. So I would say probably at the beginning of the year, January, I started. Yeah.
I'm going to bring up a comment in just a moment, but before I do, I want to give a shout out to Donald Feltham.
Okay.
Donald, I had the good fortune of being on his radio program a few weeks ago to promote a show that I was doing, and I promote him every week in my newsletter. And when he sent me the details for this week's show, it was an interview with you.
That's
That's
right.
how I came to know you, the Broadway radio show,
Mhm.
and in great interview, by the way. And I mean, isn't that a fun format, first of all? So I was listening to that, and you did talk about the list songs. I think
Mhm.
the most, in my opinion, Cole Porter was probably the most famous
Mhm.
person for the list songs. But Sondheim also, and this brings it up. Alan says Cole Porter's cultural references in his sophisticated stanzas have long been lost on many people. Who now knows of BB's bathysphere that Sondheim mentions, and I'm still here from Follies. And this,
Mhm.
of course, is referenced in your book.
Mhm. Mhm. Cole Porter, uh, when he made jokes and references, almost always they were contemporary. He did go back to literature. He'll use Shakespeare and other things, but a lot of his in jokes, and they weren't in jokes. Most of the audience knew who these people were. When Sondheim writes "I'm Still Here," most of the audience don't remember the things that Carlotta is going through because she's older. And so there's a big difference there between Sondheim is saying, some people are going to recognize these, but this is what was important to her. She lived through Brenda Fraser. To her, is like that's an accomplishment because that woman had no talent and she was on the newspapers and magazines all the time, and I had to compete with that. Um, and I was so disappointed. The most recent recording of that, somebody changed it to Shirley Temple because they thought more people would know who Shirley Temple is than
Right.
Brenda Fraser. And to me, it's not nearly the same thing because Shirley Temple was never a threat to Carlotta, the young, wide-eyed vamp or whatever she was.
Well, all of these, I mean, Carlotta's song are
Mhm.
really about cultural references through a
Yes.
lifetime.
Yeah.
And and I agree with you. I mean, I cringe when there are certain lyrics that are changed as time goes on,
Mhm.
simply because people feel that people won't know who they are.
Mhm.
As I said, I go back and I do the research and I go back and figure
Yeah.
out who these people are. But as you were writing this book, um, what was the biggest surprise for you? Were there references that you thought that you knew that?
Oh, there were some that I was dead wrong on. I'd heard this 100 times, and I thought, well, that must be one of those things. And then I go research it. Boy, I was nowhere close. Um, in Anything Goes, they're going back and forth on "You're the Top," and he says to, I forget if it's he or she, "You're a Brewster body," and I thought, oh, that must be some sexy, pinup girl or something, and he's saying you got the body of the Brewster. And then I go find out it's armor from World War One. It was a plate of armor that you wore, a Brewster body, invented by somebody named Brewster. And
Mhm.
it was like, this is not at all what I thought. And it's funnier because that list song, half of them are sort of caged insults, and some of them are compliments. To say you have a Brewster body was like, well, that's like saying, wow, you're built like you know,
Yeah.
like a knight in armor. So yeah, there were a lot of surprises, and some my instinct was right, but I didn't know the details. I said, oh. Another one I for years listened to Harold Hill sing about um, trotting race where they sit right in, not a wholesome trotting race where they sit right down on the horse. And I thought, well, of course they're going to sit on a horse. But he's referring to before the turn of the century, horse racing wasn't jockeys and race horses. It was harness racing.
Mhm.
And the star was the horse. Somebody had to drive it. And so when he goes and says, imagine some stuck-up jockey boy sitting on Dan Patch. And I thought, well, maybe it's a certain kind of horse. Maybe it's a certain this, Dan Patch was the secretariat maybe of the harness thing. And he's saying, well, can you imagine taking a great horse like Dan Patch and then somebody riding on his back and hitting him with a whip? He said, makes your blood boil, So I was wrong on that one, and but I could see the point he was making because all the people in River City, they only knew harness racing. They heard about horse racing. It sounded like it was just a gambler's thing, although I'm sure they bet on harness racing too. So yeah, there were a lot of surprises.
Was your research on this book, obviously this is a very different type of book from the other books that you've written. Was your research on this book similar to other books that you've done as far as your research is concerned, or did you have a completely different method of research for
It was
this?
a whole new world because most of my research is in theater, film, history, and music. But if I wanted to find out, what an arrow collar was,
Mhm.
no theater book is going to help me there, So I went I went by the most trusted dictionaries, and they were pretty good, unless it was something that was very cultural and popular. Then I had to go further, and put in someone like Margie Hart. Who is Margie Hart? She's not going to show up in a dictionary, but they refer to her in the song Zip, and I assume she's a stripper, but maybe
Yes.
not. So then you start looking at a different kind of dictionary, a cultural or popular culture type thing. And Margie Hart, turns out she was this stripper who was totally untalented. Not that most strippers needed talent,
Who the hell
and
was she?
but she was beautiful. She was absolutely beautiful, and she was billed as the poor man's Greta Garbo.
Yes.
Greta's not going to strip for you, but if you want the face, and so to me that was fascinating. But it was like no theater book is ever going to tell me that. So it was different research. I think that's why it was such a fun book to do, because I was going to all different news sources. The previous book, right
What
before that.
as far as the shows that you chose?
I went through them all, and there were some I thought, oh, this is a favorite show. Everybody knows this show. And I went through and said, gee, there really isn't much in there. I'll give you a good example. Into the Woods. People love Into the Woods. But Into the Woods takes place in its own fairy tale reality. It makes no references to the real world. And Into the Woods could have been written in 1954 or 1994, and it didn't matter because it wasn't taking in the world around it. So it was like, oh, everybody loves Into the Woods. I got to include that. But there's nothing to describe. It's all there. That was true for Once Upon a Mattress, another show that people love. But she makes no jokes about the modern world because it's in this fairy tale medieval
Well,
world.
do you think that it's because that the writers were very specific to keep it in that fairy tale?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, they could have had, Sondheim could have had the witch make some reference to something in the news and got a laugh, but he didn't want to do that, and neither did James Lapine in the script.
Mhm.
That no, they didn't want to acknowledge the outside world. Most musicals do, and most musicals are set in the past. We like, especially the operettas and all the early stuff. Nobody wanted a modern musical. It was silly. You wanted a musical that was set in an exotic place in a time in the past. And those are the musicals, if they're trying to be accurate, those are the ones that have the great references to it. After Music Man, I think one of the most references was Mame.
Mhm.
And the guys who wrote Mame, they did a very good job on the script and Jerry Herman's lyrics. And Mame is interesting because you do 20s slang for the early scenes. then you're doing 1930s slang, for the next part of the play, and it goes all the way through the 50s. So the reason that has so many references is because they're referencing four major time periods, and I was surprised. I kept turning, they kept coming up. The character of her actress friend. Oh my goodness, Vera.
Vera.
Yeah. Every time she opens her mouth, it's a reference to something of that time period, or even Gooch after they meet Beauregard. I think Gooch is the one who says, "I never thought Santa Claus would look like Rhett Butler."
Yeah, Butler.
Right?
Well,
It's
I'm
a
gonna ask
30s.
you about this, because I mean, if you look at Anti-Mame and you look at
Mhm.
Mame,
Mhm.
Jerry Herman was a genius in terms of transferring a lot to the musical.
Oh yes.
But there's also references in Anti-Mame that are not in Mame. But you stuck solely with the
I
musical.
looked at the libretto. Yeah, I know the play pretty well. And they're by the same person. The two guys wrote the same
Jerome
wrote
Lawrence
the
and Robert E. Lee.
play.
Yes.
I read the original book, but they did a very good job because the book is like a autobiography, by Patrick. And then they turned that into a very good musical. Excuse me, a very good comedy, which was made into a movie. And then the same two guys turned it into a musical. They knew what to cut, and they probably were a little bit more aware of their audience when they did the musical, but they still put a lot of things in there. They didn't care if the audience got it or not,
Mhm.
especially Vera, to say, uh, I'll have you know that she says, you don't know what it's like to be a mother, Mame says to her. She's sort of the mother to
I
Patrick.
played Mother Cabrini.
It says, I played Mother Cabrini in Pittsburgh in Lent.
Yes.
Now, Mother Cabrini, that's a different knowledge, the first saint, but she's playing her in Pittsburgh on the road, and most theaters closed in Lent.
That's
And,
right.
you didn't go to the theater during Lent, so she's making a double, three things there. Is her joke about, hey, I know all about being a mother. I played Mother Cabrini. They could have cut that, but it's like no, it's just too good. It's just too perfect.
Do
So
you
I
have
think
any
those are the top.
theories from your perspective on why Mame is never revived? I mean, it's done a lot in stock
Oh yeah,
in the country,
yeah.
but it's never been revived on Broadway.
Yeah, uh, even when Angela Lansbury brought it back once, it didn't even run very. It was very strange. It is a star vehicle, um, and I think maybe that combination of the right star to play it. So many stars played it, on Broadway and on the road. I thought Ann Miller was one of the best Mames I ever saw. She never did it on Broadway.
No,
They
she did. She did.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
replaced. Yeah, she was a
Really
wonderful
shot
name.
adrenaline right back into that show.
Yeah, and, so it's not like we don't have the stars. This recent revival of Dolly and then replacing, Bette Midler with Bernadette Peters and,
Donna Murphy.
whatever. It makes you realize that these, Dolly and Mame are the same ilk,
Mhm.
a woman show, not young and personality galore. If they wanted to do a Mame, just think of how good Christine Ebersol would be as Mame.
I saw Christine Ebersol do Mame.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
That woman has done so much. I shouldn't
know.
say,
She
yeah.
did Paper Mill Playhouse,
Okay, she's done
and
a lot.
Jerry Herman actually supervised that production.
Uh-huh.
She was wonderful.
Yeah, I would
I was lucky
imagine.
enough to see
Yes,
that,
yes.
and Jerry was in the audience when I was there, so it was
Oh,
great
that's
to
good.
see that.
So this was not recently, obviously, but,
No, this was many
she's
years.
one of those people that she doesn't have the box office a name like Bette Midler, but she's one of those people who can just do just about anything. And there's other ones, you can imagine different names. I know Broadway saw Celeste Home for a while. Um, did Dorothy Lamour do it, or am I thinking of Dolly? I'm probably getting the
Dorothy
two.
Lamour did the tour of Dolly, but she didn't do
Yeah,
it Broadway.
they're I get the two shows mixed up, but they kept them running with new Mames and new Dollies and whatnot.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's my feeling about Mame. I'd love to see it again.
Well, you referenced earlier lyrics being changed, such as Brenda Fraser now being Shirley Temple.
Mhm.
Uh, what are your thoughts on revisals and shows being updated for modern audiences? Do you have any thoughts on
I'm trying to think of an example where they took out a lot of good stuff. Um, Take the revisal of Flower Drum Song. Now, I included Flower Drum Song in the book, knowing that is not one of the 50 most produced musicals, but I think it was such an important musical and it was such a timely musical that I think it was Mark Robbins who said, you got to include Follies and Flower Drum Song, even though you can't say they're done all the time. And and I saw that revisal, and it was a major, major
that?
revisal.
Saw it as well.
A
Yes.
Rodgers and Hammerstein musical comedy. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, they took a musical comedy and they turned it into a musical play. It got very serious. I loved a lot of it, but the references just weren't there. Grant Avenue, Chop Suey. I don't know if they took them out or they just didn't work as well.
They watered them down.
That might be the best way to put it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So the aunt, when she's singing about, Perry Como, and she's singing about your maiden form bra, I just, the audiences don't know that now. And they did at the time because it was a contemporary musical. And
But I do love the reference in when Clara Bow is mentioned, and then
oh,
the
yeah.
response is who?
Yeah. Yeah. They added that. Clara Bow on the Late Late Show. Because that's how people knew old movies. There weren't in 1950. I think that's what 58. There weren't revival houses. There were no videos, DVDs. So if you ever wanted to watch an old movie, it was probably on the Late Late Show. And Clara Bow is going back. It's silent films, and I love that reference that you can watch Clara Bow. She's been dead for years, yeah, and so that this protect themselves. Somebody went, who? Yeah. To me, it's like in the cabaret act, turn around and say, whoever that is.
Right.
Now, Fanny Bryce couldn't do that, but
No,
somebody in
no.
a cabaret can get away with it. But for Fanny Bryce not to know who she's idolizing, the great part, I want to be Camille and I want to cough and I want to die and I want to have the audience just in tears. Yeah, that's a bigger deal.
Thomas, I'm always curious with a book, and this one especially. Who made the decision that the book was ready for us to have in our hands? Was it your decision? Was it the editor? Was it the publisher? Applause Books, we'll give a shout out to them as well. Who made that final decision? And after the book came out, did you feel that there were things that you wanted to go back and revisit, or did you feel that there were some references that were left out, or did you feel that you pretty much had covered everything?
I was pretty careful for each of the 50 shows. I got a hold of the libretto. All right. And so I wanted to go through every piece of dialogue and all the lyrics. And then in the case of Cole Porter, he wrote all these extra lyrics that don't show up in the libretto, but if you get the complete lyrics of Cole Porter, they're there. And so I felt for the shows I picked, I think I got everything. I tried not to insult people by adding something that's so well known. But on the other hand, these days, I don't know what it would
Well,
take
I
to
asked you
insult.
about that because depending on where you're from, and
Yes.
where you grew up, and what you've been exposed to, that's
Hmm.
the bottom line.
And
Uh,
your age.
and your age.
Your age. So, a high school kid is getting really interested in something, and here's Hairspray, Uncle Tom, Aunt Jemima, Little Black Sambo. Not going to know any of those. So there's that too. Yeah, that you just. I'm thinking I listened to this when I'm 12 and 13, and I missed a lot of stuff. So why wouldn't a 12 or 13-year-old today, who's into musicals and go, oh wow, is that what that is? I'm even surprised. I didn't include it because it didn't have enough references, but in A Little Night Music, and I taught for many years, taught musical theater, and I'd have students come in and they're going to report on A Little Night Music, and somebody's going to report on The Miller's Son. Oh, this is one of my favorite songs of all time. And I said, yeah, that's great. What's a Miller? No idea. It's like, it's called The Miller's Son. Aren't you interested to know what a Miller is? So they're everywhere. Yeah. You're always surprised by what people don't know. And yeah. Um, I think if I had to do the book again, I think some shows didn't have enough references, and I probably could have substituted one that had more. A show like um, Brigadoon, a lot of Scottish terms, but again, that's a musical.
Brigadoon is in the book.
Oh yeah, it's in the book, and I'm just wondering, is there a musical I missed that that I should have done in case, or go more than 50? I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting in 10 years. There's going to be a bunch of musicals that already people are going to be like, well, and dear Evan Hansen, what did they mean when they said blah blah blah? The world changes that fast.
But that's true. But then you look at a musical like Hamilton, which
Yeah.
of course has all these historical references, and perhaps there's a new book for you on these historical musicals.
Yeah.
But would you consider those types of musicals in terms of those references? Because I'm sure that a lot of people probably, I mean, again, I was that geeky kid, still am, who look these things up if I don't know what it means. If I'm watching a movie or a TV show or something and a reference comes up, again, in the world of Henry Orient, last night, he walks out of Carnegie Hall and the number over Carnegie Hall is 161. And I went, wait a minute, I don't think that's right. So I looked it up, and of course it was the wrong address.
Oh, I see. This was he coming out of the concert hall or out of the school and the studios?
He was walking through the front entrance.
Oh, okay.
So it was
definitely
not the right address there.
Yeah.
But, there may have been reasons why when they filmed it that they wanted to use a different address or something.
Or that might have been, I'll just never forget. I lived in Dayton, Ohio in my high school years, and I remember watching a TV show about UFOs. And the headquarters for UFO was study UFOs by the government was in Dayton, Ohio, and the opening shot was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with palm trees. There are no palm trees in Dayton, Ohio. Never were, never will be. So sometimes you just, movies do that. As far as inaccuracies, I found Annie had the most. Who wrote the script for that? He's so
Thomas S.
Yes. Anyway, he kept referring to things. It says in the libretto, this takes place within these 3 months of 1933. And he had things that had not happened yet. For example, the fireside chats had not even started yet when this musical took place. He probably knew that and thought it's not worth worrying about because fireside chats is important to understand FDR. So I did run across a lot of depression stuff that they just were a little bit off by a couple months, but it doesn't matter. If you know what a fireside chat is, it's perfect for them to mention that at that point in the musical. That was the only one I noticed where I found mistakes when I went to the actual.
Well, I wanted to ask you, are there references to certain things in other musicals that are inaccurate references? I don't mean mistakes that are made, but where they fudge a little bit with using certain terms, phrases.
Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they knew, but they said, it's too good to pass up. I'll give you a pretty recent example. I think the score for Grey Gardens is superb. I think it's one of the best scores of the last 20 years. And so I'm not down on the two guys who wrote that. But when they're singing a song and she says, oh, remember, Mama, this is a song you taught me when I was a little girl. And this show takes place in 1941, I believe. And so she's remembering a song that she, a little girl. And in the song, they say, it's like Crosby and Hope. Now, Crosby and Hope had never even met each other in the 1920s or the 30s. The road pictures are 40s, And I could have bought it if they were singing in the 40s about the 40s, but she was making a big point. This is a song from my youth, and she's in her 30s now or something. And I don't blame, it rhymed. I don't know what it rhymed with something, I'm sure, but it just bothers me because it's like, no, she wouldn't sing that in the old days.
Things like
Um,
that drive me crazy, and I'll give you 2 examples. And, right after Liberace passed away,
okay.
there were several TV movies, and one of them, I don't remember who the actor was, but I do remember that Rue McClanahan played his mother. Uh, and I know that someone's gonna pick up and let me know which,
Even
version.
Victor Garber?
Uh, I'm sorry?
Victor Garber, maybe?
Uh, I don't know if it was Victor Garber.
Yeah.
Uh,
There were several. You're right. That
there were
wasn't
several,
one.
but he was playing in a speakeasy in 1935, I think it was,
Mhm.
and he was playing the man that got away, which was written in 1954.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
also in, It's the Lovely,
Yes, I was just gonna thinking of that.
yeah, in It's the Lovely, there are many inaccuracies
Yeah.
as to when certain songs were written. The film opens when Cole Porter first arrives in Hollywood, with uh, one of the first songs him writing in Hollywood, "Be a Clown," which of course did not come
Oh,
into the late
yeah,
into
yeah.
the 40s.
Um, that movie got away with certain things because it wasn't a realistic biography. It was kind of surreal at times. And when Kevin Kline sang "True Love," a song that wasn't written until what high society is in the 50s, and he's singing it in the 1920s, and he says, "What do you think of that song?" He's like, "Well, you haven't written it yet," is what I thought. But yeah, that movie took a lot of liberties as well. Yeah, and just look at all the movie biographies of the past, how wrong, or nah, I can't say wrong, but they just, Cole Porter's night and day. I don't think there was anything that was accurate in that except that
Well, I
he
mean,
liked those songs.
many of those movies that came out around that same time, Night and Day and Words and Music, and
Oh,
there were many liberties.
Gershwin one. Oh my goodness.
Um,
Till the clouds roll by. Yeah.
Till the Clouds Roll By.
Yeah.
Again, getting back and revisiting these, were there things that you had forgotten that came back to you in going back to these? And I mean, I know you went back and you read the libretto of all of these,
Mhm.
but did you go and watch the films as well, or are there other
I
references?
listened to a few songs
Mhm.
after I read the lyric, and I went, "Boy, I don't remember this." And then when I listened to it, was like, "Oh yeah, they always said that," but I just went right over my head. Um, and dialogue too, because I know, we tend to listen to the soundtracks over and over again. We don't read the script over and over again unless you've seen the show many times. I would say there were more things in the libretto that I went, "Oh boy, I forgot about that reference." Because although
Well,
I'm
does the original libretto for Anything Goes even exist anymore? Because that has been
um,
changed so
I
many.
don't think so. There's a slightly revised one that they did. I think it may have come from that off-Broadway version, and
Mhm.
then they did a new version for Lincoln Center. So what I did is I looked at all of them. Same thing with Showboat. I looked at all of them, and if it was in any of them, I included it. For example, Anything Goes. They switch the songs around like crazy. So some of them have "Take Me Back to Manhattan," which is not written for it,
I
and even
Well,
Fred.
I did, Anything Goes in stock. I played Sir Evelyn Oakley, and,
Can
I
can
went
you
to
recall what version it would have been?
uh, this was, based on the Patti LuPone version.
Oh, okay, that's Lincoln
Uh,
Center.
but the song that he sings, with Reno, is "The Gypsy in Me." But I prefer "Let's Misbehave." So
Mhm,
I went to the director and said, "Could
mhm,
we possibly do 'Let's Misbehave'?" And they
mhm.
did. That's the version
Yeah,
that I did in the show.
yeah.
I think it's a much
Um,
better song, and it's much
eh,
more fun to perform.
I wouldn't do that to a Sondheim show, but a Cole Porter show, I would, So he writes, "You'd Be So Easy to Love," is the original. Gaxton William Jackson cannot hit the high notes, so they cut the song and they give him All Through the Night, maybe, and and uh, it doesn't matter. They're both great love songs.
Hmm.
They weren't written with the character in mind, when Cole Porter wrote those love songs, he didn't know who was going to be playing it or what character would sing it. Um, and you could do that, I feel more, with confidence. But I wouldn't want to turn around and take a song out of Sweeney Todd and put something from Into the Woods.
No,
It
of
just
course not.
it just would, it's
Years
just
ago, a friend of mine was doing a cabaret show in New York, and he was doing a tribute to Stephen Sondheim. He
hmm
had a through line with a story in it, and Sondheim, he was sent a cease and desist letter. And it
yeah.
wasn't that he objected to him doing the songs, he
Mhm.
objected to the fact that he had put a story
Mhm.
connecting those
Yeah.
songs that he did not create.
Yes.
And that was the issue with him.
Mhm.
I also know that Richard Rodgers was a stickler for his songs being performed exactly as he wrote them. And so, knowing that, and I've been fortunate enough to, Celeste Holm was a dear friend of mine,
Uh-huh.
Roy Reams, people that, the stories that I've heard, Leslie Ann Warren, about working with Richard Rodgers and respecting him, actually.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
it bothers me tremendously when a singer, uh, and I realize that everyone should have their own interpretation of a
Mhm.
song, but when they change the entire style of the song, I
Mhm.
have huge issues with that, even
Mhm.
if it's done in a cabaret room or uh, how, however they decide to do it.
Mhm. Now, in Roger's case, he's only concerned with the music.
Exactly.
Someone is, "Hey, wait a minute, I really wanted that to end on a F sharp, and you turned it into, a bebop thing." Um, and I don't think he ever complained about a lyric change because he knew lyrics were very important, but that wasn't his area. Um, and Andrew Lloyd Webber is the same way. He's very very particular about music, but if the lyrics nowhere close to the original, he's even said, "I didn't write the lyrics. I don't remember them." So Rogers was he was a serious guy, and,
Mhm.
and this is my work, and and you're just you're having fun with it, doing weird things, um and it's hard in a cabaret setting, whatnot. When you do the show, you don't mess with it. You're doing carousel, you don't decide to jazz up you know, a song like the Clam Bake, but I'm sure somebody's done it as a jazz piece or as a swing number in some cabaret somewhere. And how do you stop that? Yeah, it's tricky. Then the case of Sondheim, he wrote that for a character. He knew the character before he wrote the song, and now you've taken that song and you've given it to a different character. That is, yeah, I can see why he'd be very upset by that.
Do you have a favorite score or a favorite musical that you never get tired of, that you could just go back and over and over and over again?
Personal reasons. The first two musicals I saw on Broadway, Company and Follies. I was spoiled for life. You can imagine. Those are your first two musicals,
Wow.
different trips. There was one trip to New York and another trip to New York.
From Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, yeah. Or in that case, I think it was going all the way from St. Louis. But so those are special to me. I don't like they do weird things to Company, and they've done everything to Company.
Mhm.
Uh, as much as I enjoy Follies, scaled down Follies to me is don't do it. If you can't do it as a Follies show, don't do it. So I would say those are two that I never get tired of, but I also take very personally. And uh, yeah, there's probably still my two favorite musicals. It's terrible. Your favorite musicals are the first two you ever saw, but I had
No,
to watch a lot of
they
musicals to realize how good those were.
well, the very first show that I saw on Broadway was Oklahoma, and it was the 1979 revival. And
Okay,
and it
It,
was
yeah.
done. I mean, it was truly a museum piece, but it was so beautifully done
Mhm.
that it still resonates. Christine Andreas, Christine Ebersol,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
just an
Lord,
incredible,
Lord's guitared and, yeah, I didn't see that. I have the recording, yeah. Mhm,
just incredible production.
mhm,
So
yeah,
I can actually absolutely understand where you're coming from
mhm,
with that.
mhm,
Um, you mentioned, I mean, and Follies is I mean, Company is one of these shows. I mean, recently we just had a gender reversal with that show,
mhm,
and Leroy Reams once said to me that if you're going to do a show, uh, either do it as it was written, or if you go, it's like baking a red velvet cake. We all know what a red velvet cake looks like, what it tastes like.
uh-huh,
Let's say, Thomas, you're going to say, I'm going to change this ingredient for
uh-huh,
this, this, and this.
mhm,
It damn well better taste better than the original.
mhm,
Otherwise, why bother?
right.
And
Or it's
and
the directors today will say, "I'm gonna make a red velvet cake. I don't like red velvet cake, so I'm gonna fix it."
right.
Then why do it? And the director of the company that was doing says that she didn't think that show was relevant anymore, so I'm gonna fix it.
As an artist, I want to give free rein to
Mhm,
the creativity of all artists.
mhm,
But by the same token, I want to respect those that went before,
mhm,
what they brought to the table,
yep,
and let them,
mhm,
why do Brigadoon or any of these other musicals if you're not going to present to the audience what they created?
mhm, definitely. Yeah, it's, uh there are revivals that were radically different, but they were in the spirit. I'm thinking of that Carousel revival that
Mhm.
was so wonderful. It was at Lincoln. It was from London, and they did it at Lincoln Center. Uh, Different, but boy, Rogers would have loved it. It was true to the spirit of everything in the original. Yeah, so we took the overture and we turned it into this, but it worked, and that happens on occasion. Then once in a while, you get a revival that is very traditional. It's just so good that you realize why the original was so good. And I would say the South Pacific revival that was at Lincoln Center, and they didn't do anything radical to it, but it was like this is what people got so excited about in 1949. A full orchestra, beautiful voices. Um, so yeah, those are the kind of revivals. It's a revival that reminds you how good the original was, or a revival that says, "Hey, I've got a new, fresh pair of eyes, but I haven't ignored what the original wanted to do." Yeah, those are to me excellent revivals. And
And
that's
do you get to see a lot of theater? I mean, I know that you're in Florida.
right now, yeah.
Are there
Up
a lot of
until most of my years were in Cortland, New York. All right, I taught at the State University in New York at Cortland, and that was about a 4 to 5 hour drive. So I would say between 1982 when I went there and I retired in 2015 that we would go in and see 4 or 5 times a year, maybe sometimes only three. But you know what happened at the end by the 2000s? Every time we went to New York, we were seeing a revival. We
Mhm.
couldn't get interested in the new stuff. Wonderful on the town revival. On the 20th century revival. And we were loving it and thinking, my goodness, when's the last time we saw? And there were some wonderful ones, but the fact that we were seeing so many revivals knew that I was getting old.
Well, Manny Eisenberg, a great article came out this week, but he says that we've chased audiences away when a chorus line opened. The top ticket price was $15,
Oh gosh.
and
Right.
I came to New York in 1979,
Okay.
and
Oh yeah.
I could go and see
Mhm,
3 and 4 Broadway shows a week.
mhm,
And there were twofers. I was able to go with friends. We would go and see shows, and
mhm,
it was just affordable to be able to go to the theater. And I don't see theater as often as I would like to see it
mhm,
because it's just so expensive
yeah.
now, and
And
it's become an elitist art form. I want to ask you. We're going to run out of time. I could go on forever with you. Um,
mhm,
w- um, Out of all the musicals that are referenced here, Are there any that you actually never saw performed live?
Run down the list here. Um, the Wonderful Town, Gypsy Sound Music. No, I've seen every one of these.
Wow.
Somewhere along, not Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there's one. Like Dreamgirls, I didn't see until recently. A really good community production. Assassins Only Community Productions, Grand Ragtime, and Shrek. I've seen the video. Didn't they make a video of Shrek? I saw the whole thing. So yeah, so I saw all of them, but I can't say I know them some as well as others.
When did the writing begin for you?
First book was 1990, and I wanted to write a book about lyrics. There were no books about lyrics back in 1990, and I started it, and I found out, to my dismay, it was so hard and expensive to quote lyrics in a book back then. And I ended up spending a lot of money on royalty, on permissions, and the book was word crazy, and it was about lyricists from Cohan all the way and a little bit past Sondheim, and it wasn't a good choice. But there were no books about lyrics at the time. There's been some real, and you didn't even have all those complete lyrics of Lorenz Hart, complete lyrics of those books didn't exist yet. They all came out in the 90s, so that was a tough start, but it was a book I thought, oh, I could write about this, but I didn't realize the consequences of writing with it. Today, you can quote lyrics much more freely. It's loosened up a lot. It's still kind of touchy, but I remember I wanted to quote one line from a Rodgers and Hammerstein thing, and they charged me $100.
Wow.
One line,
I was in church on Sunday, and a lady in church, she kept several times she would reference a lyric from a Broadway musical, and she said, "These songs are the soundtrack of my life." And
Yes.
I said, "I absolutely understand where you're coming from, and I'm right there with you."
Yeah.
Thomas, I want to say congratulations. At the beginning of the show, I made the mistake of saying dissecting. It is decoding.
Well, whatever.
You give all of us a chance to go back and revisit and to really dig a little bit deeper. And I thank you for this. And I want to say, Donald Futham, thank you for having you on the show because it brought you to my attention. And I'm going to go and check out your other books as well. And reaching out to you and you saying yes to me. The book just came out this week. I was lucky to get this from the Drama Bookshop because it was the last one left. So it's flying off the shelves. So congratulations about that. I'm going to give my final word of the day, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. And you're going to have the final word. It could be about anything that we spoke about today that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave everyone with today. I want to thank everyone who took the time to be here today. I want to remind you all that our sponsor for this show today is my dear friend Patty Bottino Bravo, and Patty is going to be appearing on Saturday night at the Laurie Beachman Theater. So if you get a chance, go and see her. She has a phenomenal voice, and she's just returned to singing after teaching for many years. So welcome back, and thank you for sponsoring today's show. I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. I want you to call your favorite bookseller, and I want you to ask them if they have Broadway Decoded on their shelves. And if they don't, tell them they need to get it. And then after they order it, I want you to order 2 copies. I want you to keep one for yourself. And if there's a friend or a companion that you love going to the theater with, get a copy for them as well. And then, in addition to this, and Thomas, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to pick up the phone and I want you to call someone that you haven't spoken to in a long time. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message. but a phone call. And let that person know that they've made a difference in your life. And by doing so, you're going to make a difference in their life. I have a dear friend, and he says, we're all in this together, but we're in different boats. And I always say, I don't care what size boat you're on, as long as you have a skipper by your side. And with that, I'm going to leave the screen. Thomas, you got the final word. And when you say goodbye, the final credits will roll. So
Okay.
you don't have to worry about how do I end this. It's all yours. Thank you for
Okay.
today. Thank you.
I think I would end saying, I'm so grateful that that musical theater became part of my life. Yeah, I didn't become a famous actor or director or writer or anything. Um, but I just think my life would have been a lot darker and less fulfilled if I hadn't at one point discovered musicals. And at one point, I felt musicals were going out and nobody was seeing them. Young people weren't. And I'm glad to say in the last 10, 20 years, that's changed. There are more people going to see musicals. There are more cabaret acts doing musical theater songs. So I'm encouraged. The things that I loved are not being missed by other people. So that would be my final thought. Thank you.